Good morning, and welcome to All People's Church, Unitarian Universalist. My name is Mary Ann Clark, and I will be your co-celebrant for this morning's service. Our Sunday service is a shared time of worship for all present as we gather for music, spoken words, a time of reflection and inspiration as a religious community. Let us come together in a spirit of compassion and respect for ourselves and others attending this service. If you're a visitor today and you haven't yet signed in, please do. There is a visitor's table by the front door. Signing in will give us the opportunity to acknowledge your visit and place you on our mailing list to receive the weekly emails and our monthly newsletter. Before we continue our service, we have a couple of announcements. One of them is from Joe Burnham about Don't Forget to Feed Me. I'm just going to tell you, see Joe Burnham about Don't Forget to Feed Me, which is about supporting people, offering support for people who are having trouble affording feeding their animals to keep them from having to give them away. And on Monday, which I guess is tomorrow. Oh, what? Oh, a week. All right, this is the 8th, okay. On Monday a week, there is a concert by Spectrum here at 7:30, and Joe Burnham will be organizing the reception. Please volunteer to help set up or help clean up for the reception. And now, please settle quietly while Misha plays us some beautiful music.
That was beautiful. Thank you. I have a, I have a short prayer before the opening words. O great Creator, when the shame of what we are is upon us, touch us with the hope of our becoming. The opening words come from Esther Hurlburt. It is not always easy to find love at the center. There's not a set of easy instructions, numbered 1 through 7, or maybe 8. It is not always easy to find love at the center. Today, in Covenant, we celebrate our living tradition, which invites us to take deep breaths of fresh air into the newness of every day, so our minds, hearts, and spirits will be continually nourished. It is not always easy to find love at the center. So for today, we gather in Covenant to celebrate the reality that love is at the core of our beings, and that love will guide us if we open ourselves to the challenges which love requires of us. May we accept this challenge with dignity and grace.
I've already given the announcement about Don't Forget to Feed Me, but just in case you are one of the 3 people in the known universe that does not know Jo Burnham, this is her right down here. We now invite you to rise in body or spirit for the chalice lighting, the opening hymn, and the spoken affirmation. Our chalice words are from the Reverend Leonard Mason. We affirm the unfailing renewal of life, rising from the earth and reaching for the sun. All living creatures shall fulfill themselves. We affirm the steady growth of human companionship, rising from ancient cradles and reaching for the stars. People all over the world shall seek the ways of understanding. We affirm a continuing hope that out of every tragedy, the spirits of individuals shall rise to build a better world. Please now join in singing our opening hymn, the hymn of the month for September, number 346, Now Let Us Sing. Please join me now in our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus we covenant with one another.
I'm not sure if we're going to have young, but we do, as always, have young at heart. So I'm going to come down here and just talk about what we've been talking about this morning. Our whole morning conversation was centered around love. And it's so appropriate at this time to talk about what that means, how that presents in our lives. How do we show love? How do we receive love? And I'm not sure I ever think a whole lot about how I receive love. I try to spend a lot of time thinking about how I show love, and that can be in almost everything we do. But I kind of wanted the children to be thinking about how they receive love. How did they fill their hearts with this love that they take back out into the world every day, into a really difficult world? I don't know that there's a generation that has had a more difficult time at this young age of having to go back out into the world and be a light for change. So I want you, each of you, to think this week about how you receive love. What things happen that open you up to allowing someone to show their love for you in all the ways that there are. So let's sing Our Spirits Out.
The purpose of this church is to encourage all who gather here to grow more generous in spirit and in action. This is the great end of all the world's faith traditions, to bring the human being closer to the divine by acts of creation and compassion. We now take an offering that allows us to exercise that all-important generosity of spirit, an offering that will support this self-supporting church and its many ministries. Let us now give freely and generously an offering to sustain and strengthen our shared religious community, a community of memory, hope, faith, and love. For we are now the keepers of its flame that burns for justice, its dream of beloved community, its vision of a world made whole. It is our custom to share the undesignated cash offerings that are collected each week. We do this on a quarterly basis for a nonprofit or a charitable institution. Our Share the Plate recipient for the third quarter is Eastside Ministries. If you prefer, donations can be made using the QR code that's on the back of the order of service. The gifts of the congregation will be most gratefully received. Will the ushers please come forward?
Thank you again, Misha, bringing us this beautiful music week after week. We're so grateful for you. Our reading this morning is called Grieving Gun Violence, written by Keith Cron. Today and forever I grieve the loss of life. I grieve for the people who died in the Appalachia High School shooting. I grieve for their families, friends, and co-workers. I grieve for those who were there and feel both lucky and guilty that they survived while others died. We have witnessed another national tragedy. I grieve for all those directly and indirectly affected by today. I grieve for those who are reminded of their own losses, the parents and family in Newtown, Connecticut, and Columbine, Colorado, the church members of the congregations in Charleston, South Carolina, and Knoxville, Tennessee, all those who know someone who has been lost in mass shooting and feel the rise of emotion that a day like today produces for them. I grieve for those who have died and those who loved them, who died when we did not pay attention. Having served as a chaplain at San Francisco General Hospital, having been trained as a hospice volunteer during the AIDS epidemic, I watched many people die, whether they were homeless or gay or people of color, and no one really noticed. I grieve for police officers and safety officials who are trained in how to respond to mass shootings. I grieve for workers who must look at and remove the bodies, who try and keep the wounded alive, who must tell family members that someone they loved has died or been hurt. I grieve for the first responders who will never forget this day. I grieve for the reporters trying to tell a story while witnessing and listening to horrific details. I grieve for the parents who must explain today to their children. I grieve for parents who have wondered if they should have done more when they've seen hatred and anger come from their children. I grieve for the parents who simply turned away or encouraged the hatred and anger. I grieve for the parents who say they didn't see this coming from their children. I grieve for schools that do not have the resources to educate and manage children, where they know some children will slip through the cracks. I grieve for those who believe there are sides and lines to be drawn. There are no sides. We all lost today. We move forward only by laying down our own sword of words and being with one another, of seeing each other's humanity and reminding ourselves that the responsibility to be a human being means remembering we are one human among billions of people on this planet. I grieve for a planet that forgets that a leading tenet of every major religion in the world is treat others as you would like to be treated. I grieve for those who will be assumed to be bad people because they are perceived to be like a shooter, whether they are Muslim, live with mental illness, a responsible gun owner, or similar in some other way. I grieve for our country where we could rush to believe that only others have the responsibility for today. We must come together for the sake of each other. I grieve for those who will die and those who will lose loved ones in the next shooting, and the next, and the next, and the next, until we decide they must stop, until we act. I grieve for a country and for a planet where this violence is all too common, all too familiar, all too tragic. I pray that each of us commits to be a little more humane, a little more compassionate, a little more willing to come together to be a part of a solution. I pray that we work together to end hatred and superiority. I pray that we decide to become better people today. I pray we never forget. I pledge to remember. I pledge to become a better person. I pledge to be a part of the solution, no matter how many solutions it takes. At this time in our service, we pause to honor and to give time and attention to those things most important to us. We gather here for healing and for peace in our hearts, and to honor our time together with the shared stories and news from the congregation. Each week there's a journal outside the entrance to the sanctuary where you can write a message of memory or hope before the service. We honor these messages by lighting 3 candles here next to our chalice. Also, at any time during our service, you are welcome to come forward and light a candle in our meditation center here at the side of the chancel. In our book of memory and hope this morning, we have been asked to remember, please pray for those who are struggling with the loss of their loved ones. Meditation words are from Reverend Scott Taylor. In this space, carved out by our quiet connection, we give thanks for the many forms of love that have formed us. The love of family that brings us into being, allows us to bloom, and then sends us on our way with the reminder that we can return no matter what. The love of partnered hearts that teach us to trust and help us to know that who we are does not end at the barrier of our own skin. The love of friends who help us feel seen and sing our song back to us when we cannot hear it with our ears alone. The love of community that bathes us in belonging and calls us to see the needs of others as our own. And the greatest love, the love that will not let us go, even in our fear, even in our failure, even when we are lonely and lost. Love invites us home, friends. If we listen, it is doing so even today. We pause at this time to hold and honor the sorrows and celebrations among us, including those deeply felt but left here unspoken. Let us pause for a moment of silent meditation, and then Misha will lift our hearts with music. I think we missed the middle hymn, but that's okay. We can go back and look at those words later. The four of us stood silently, staring at the big dead tree that has shaded my bedroom for more than 3 decades, knowing it had to come down. Otherwise, risking it landing on power lines or the neighbor's house or my pig. We agreed to meet and discuss how to safely approach this. That was in March. Tuesday morning at 5:15, I heard a sharp crack and a heavy thud. We had done nothing, knowing this was coming, knowing there was a very clear and present danger, and it happened just as we knew it would. Thankfully, it fell diagonally, yard corner to yard corner, only crushing the empty baby chick nursery that we planned to replace in the spring anyway. Again, the four of us looked out over that downed tree, this time making a plan for cleanup. Wednesday, we all stood in shock as, once again, a mass shooter took the lives of 4 and wounded another 9. If only we had seen that coming. After the Nashville shooting in 2023, Reverend Lori Buford wrote, "A colleague of mine in the United Church of Christ says the first time she used the word damn in a sermon, she was preaching on gun violence. Since then, whenever she's preaching on the topic, her title is something like, 'Another Damn Sermon on Guns.'" Buford told of her well of remembrance, a jar in which she drops a pebble for each person killed by gun violence. Last year, she had to find a larger jar. And this week, after another round of thoughts and prayers courtesy of Marjorie Taylor Greene, what kept running through my head was, save your fake prayers. Prayer never saved one single person from a bullet, but changing our culture of guns and gun violence will. 2 weeks ago, I preached on dreaming together for ways to serve our congregation and community. And here I am trying to preach on how to love and be loved. None of it makes sense given what is happening over and over and over in our country. It's a strange coincidence that the theme for September is the practice of invitation. I had it in my mind to give some syrupy lines about how love changes us. Let me just read the blurb from our page. By being surrounded by love, we open our minds to another person's perspective. We allow ourselves to hear their opinions and their morals and challenge our own thoughts. And occasionally those thoughts change. To be loved is an invitation to change at the deepest level, an invitation to become fully a part of the interdependent web of creation. But then the school shooting at Appalachia High School happened, and those words just sounded so fake, so unrealistic, so very impossible, so weak. And by speaking them, I was basically pretending that gun violence wasn't nearly the tangled and complex sickness plaguing our country that is reported in the news. I walk around each day in my bubble of denial, thinking that love can change everything. Then we have another mass shooting, and that bubble pops, and I fall right back into reality. If you're like me, it messes you up inside. It makes me sick. It produces fear and anxiety. It makes me ask deep questions, like, why do we continue to allow this violence? How can we find the peace we're looking for? Where is all that love that can change us at the deepest level? I am called to hold a candle up in the darkness, and I cannot even find a way to light it. The words I want to say are Pollyanna wishful thinking, where I sugarcoat the harsh reality of life. The words I need to say are much harsher, less of a candle and more like a blowtorch. But is it possible for love to ignite that blowtorch? Can we keep love at the center of our existence and comfort victims and families when we are at a point in our culture where love does not keep anyone safe? One journalist, calling once again for gun control, said, "This isn't a mystery why people are dying. Our presidential candidates are speaking now behind bulletproof glass because even the Secret Service can't keep them safe. There are 3,000 ATF agents trying to stop the flood of millions of guns into our communities. Our youngest generation is experiencing trauma terror, relying on their cell phones to to text a final "I love you" to their parents. Even the shooters and their families are victims of this growing gun culture. There are problems in the world that are very hard to solve, but this isn't one of them. Gun ownership rose dramatically with the shift in mission of the NRA. That is no surprise to anyone. It's also no surprise that there are about 125 guns for every 100 people in the U.S. Americans are purchasing 1.3 million guns per month this year. A larger percentage of gun owners are Republican, male, and white. The majority of non-gun owners in a household with a gun owner are not comfortable with the guns in their home. And that number continues to rise as we continue to distort the Second Amendment. Did you know that gun violence in Texas costs us $51.3 billion annually? I refuse to believe that the number of deaths from gun violence are merely the price we pay for the right to bear arms. All those people who died, they had a right to live. There's got to be a better way. So why aren't things changing? Reverend Kathy Harrington spoke last year after the Nashville shooting that left 6 dead, 3 of whom were 9 years old. She called us to take 3 steps. Side with love, speak openly about gun violence, and act to change our gun laws and gun culture. The first step brought my mind back to a healthier place. Side with love. Always. Love can spark change. It can. It just can't be inactive love. It must be a radical, divine love that makes things new. A love that compels us to be open about how gun violence is impacting us, unafraid to talk about the trauma. It has to be a love so great that we force a change that starts here in this sanctuary and continues through reconciliation, helping people unify under the common idea that each of us has the right to live without fear of being the next casualty in the next mass shooting. It must be a love so great that we actively and vocally choose our children over guns. Anything less than this means we are not accepting the invitation to love and be loved. Anything less than this means we do not truly share our shared values and the love that binds us one to another. Dr. Joanna Cohen, an emergency room physician, recently treated a 14-year-old gunshot victim. She said, as he lay in the trauma bay, he asked me the question I always get from kids in these circumstances. He looked at me as an adult more than a doctor and asked, "Am I going to be okay?" Well, he survived. He will walk again, but he's not going to be okay. None of our children will be okay, shot or not, if we don't address the fact that guns are inherently dangerous and the culture around them is endangering not only us, but our kids. She goes on to say that though my emergency room is in Baltimore, one of the highest impact cities in the country, firearms are now the #1 killer of children and teens everywhere in the United States. The failure to address this crisis has normalized the unimaginable. When we fail to pursue upstream solutions that disrupt the violence and prevent the harm in the first place, my colleagues and I are left treating wounds that should never be inflicted on anyone, let alone a child. Now that's the worst part. Knowing that every single one of these incidents of gun violence is entirely preventable. In a conversation Thursday, someone was lamenting the shooting, calling it senseless and heartbreaking. Another responded that we lose a lot more people in wars than school shootings. A third person said, it could have been so much worse. My response was that it could have been so much better by it not happening at all. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, by our silence, by our willingness to compromise principle, by our readiness to allow arms to be purchased at will and fired at whim, by allowing our movie and television screens to teach our children that the hero is the one who masters the art of shooting and the technique of killing, by allowing all those developments, we have created an atmosphere in which violence and hatred have become popular pastimes. We can change this. Accepting the invitation to be loved, to love and be loved, is like a Christian baptism, only actually transformative. This creative spirit of love can change us. We can let go of our opinions, our habits, our ideas, our agendas, our weapons. A friend called it an insurgency of love that gives us the power to find a new way to be in community with each other. We know there isn't a prayer strong enough to stop the gun industry or console the families of those murdered. But love can. Love in action can. We can stand there staring at that tree that we know is going to fall, or we can get to cutting it down. Will you rise in body or spirit and join us in the closing hymn, number 6, As Long as I Have Breath.
Our chalice extinguishing words are from Frederick Gillis. May the love that overcomes all differences and heals all wounds and puts to flight all fears, that reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us, now and always.
If you go to the Texas Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry website, you will find ways that you can become involved that do not require much of you. Some things, all you have to do is write your congressional leaders, put the pressure on them. It can be done. Every week, we gather in this beautiful space to find peace. Each week, words and music offer and celebrate peace, with the hope of instilling it in us. Now take the peace you have found here back out into the world with you, renewed in our faith and inspired to act. Let us be the peacemakers the world aches for. And by being peacemakers, let us find the peace we long for. Go in peace, make peace, and be at peace. Service has now ended. We ask that you join us for coffee and conversation in the library at the back of the sanctuary. Go be justice givers.